He said he would be back in 3 days. Just 3 days, that's what he promised. We stood by the old gate, where the dirt road forked into the path to the city, and he hugged me like he wasn't sure when he'd feel that again. I remember how light his bag was. Just a shirt, some bread, and a folded piece of paper with an address a cousin had given us. He was only 19, but in that moment, with the way he looked at me, I saw a man trying to carry all the weight of our broken life on his shoulders. I told him to be careful, but he just smiled like he knew something I didn't. The first day after he left, I fixed the fence by the chicken coop. The second day, I patched a leak in the roof with strips of burlap and tar. By the third day, I'd swept the house twice and watched the road 100 times, but the path stayed empty, and the wind just moved dust around like it didn't care. I told myself he might have stayed an extra night to rest or couldn't find the address. He wasn't a city boy after all. He'd never even seen a train until last week. That night, I sat by the stove and stared at the same burned log for hours. The silence was louder than ever. I reached for his bowl out of habit before I realized he wasn't here to fill it. I left it on the table anyway, like some part of me thought he might walk through the door just in time for supper. The dogs didn't bark that night. Even they knew there was no one coming. A week passed, and then 2. I asked a neighbor if he'd heard anything, and he just shook his head slowly, the way people do when they want to pretend it's not as bad as it looks. I walked to the nearest village with what little money I had, paid a man to send a telegram to the address my son had written down. I never got a reply. Maybe the address was wrong. Maybe nobody lived there anymore. Maybe someone just took his bag and left the paper lying in the street. I began writing letters. I don't know why. I had no one to send them to. Just his name at the top, like I was telling the words to him directly. "We had rain last night," I wrote. "The cabbage grew well this year. Your sister still asks about you." But I never signed them. I couldn't. I didn't know if he was still mine to write to. Some nights I read those letters aloud just to hear his name in the room again. 3 months in, I heard a rumor from a traveler. He said boys were going missing in the city, taken by men with trucks who promised them work and gave them chains instead. I asked for more, but he just looked away and mumbled something about keeping my nose out of the dust. I held my breath for a long time that night, trying not to imagine a chain around my son's ankle. But it was too late. The image had already carved itself into the back of my mind. I stopped repairing things around the house. There was no point in fixing what only he noticed. The shutter on his window clapped in the wind, but I let it. The door squeaked, the floor creaked, and I let them all speak in his absence. They were his sounds. They belonged to the life he left behind. I didn't want silence anymore. I wanted proof that he had once been here. One morning, a letter arrived. My hands shook so badly I couldn't read the first line. It wasn't from him. It was from the city office. It said someone found a wallet near the train tracks with his name on a torn slip inside. They wanted to confirm if he was mine. I sat down slowly, reread the single paragraph over and over, but it never changed. No body, no belongings, just a name and a question, as if I could somehow confirm a ghost. I wrote back. "He is mine," I said. "He's the kind that watches out for others, even if it means getting hurt himself. He laughs when the chickens chase each other and cries when the dog gets sick. He is not just a name. He is my boy." I sealed the envelope and held it for a long time before placing it in the mailbox. It felt like sending a piece of myself into the dark. Every day since, I check for a reply. Even now, months later, I walk the path to the mailbox like it leads to something more than just paper. I dream of him standing on the porch, dirty and tired, smiling like the day he left. But when I wake, it's just me and the wind and the bowl on the table still untouched. He promised 3 days. It's been a year, and I still set out his plate. The seasons changed, but I kept everything in the house exactly as it was the day he left. His coat still hung by the door, with one sleeve inside out like he had pulled it off in a hurry. His boots stayed under the bed, though they gathered dust thick enough to cover the cracks. I couldn't bring myself to move them. It felt like touching them would erase something important, like the last trace of him might vanish under my fingers. So instead, I looked at them every morning, just to remind myself he was once here. Some neighbors stopped asking about him. I don't blame them. People have their own worries. A few offered quiet condolences, but I never accepted them. I didn't want their pity. I wanted news. Even bad news would have been better than this. This slow, invisible unraveling. When someone dies, you bury them. But when they disappear, you bury hope over and over again, and it never stays down. I traveled to the town again, spent what little I had left to find a man who worked near the train station. He said he saw a boy that fit the description, confused, asking about street names. That was months ago, he added, and he wasn't sure if the boy ever found what he was looking for. I thanked him anyway, gave him a piece of smoked fish and a coin for his time. It was more than I could afford, but less than I would have paid for the truth. Back at home, I began dreaming strange things. Sometimes I saw my son walking down a long road with no end, always walking but never getting closer. Other nights, I saw him knocking on the door, his face thin and tired, but when I opened it, no one was there. Once, I dreamed he was a child again, sitting on the floor eating boiled potatoes, laughing at nothing. I woke up with tears dried on my face, and for a few seconds, I believed he was still in the next room. I wrote another letter. This one I didn't even try to send. "If you're out there," I wrote, "just give me a sign. You don't have to explain. Just let me know you still breathe. I'll come to you. I'll walk the whole country if I have to." I folded the letter and placed it inside his boot, as if his footsteps might somehow carry the words back to him. That winter was harsh, the kind that eats through your coat and bones at the same time. I lost 3 chickens and the cow stopped giving milk. Still, I shoveled the path every morning, in case he returned and didn't want to wade through snow. That's the kind of father I was becoming, one who prepared for miracles, even when he stopped believing in them, one who scraped frost from the window just to see the same empty path. A traveler passed through and stayed a night in the barn. I gave him stew and bread in exchange for stories. He said the city was full of boys like mine, mouths too young for hunger, eyes too old for dreams. Factories didn't need names, only hands. Sometimes they get paid, he said. Sometimes they just disappear. He didn't mean it cruelly. He said it like he'd seen it happen too often to lie about it. After he left, I sat in the barn and thought about the city swallowing my boy. Not in a single bite, but slowly, like fog, like rot, like forgetting. I imagined him trying to ask for help in a place that had no use for kindness. I imagined him walking past people who wouldn't look up. And worst of all, I imagined him giving up, not dying, just giving up. The next week, I built a small fire by the tree where we used to split wood. I brought out one of his shirts and placed it by the flame. I didn't burn it. I couldn't. I just watched the light flicker on the fabric, like it might wake some part of him wherever he was. The cold wrapped around me like a second skin, but I didn't move. I sat until the fire died, and even then, I stayed a little longer. I don't talk much these days. The neighbors think I've gone quiet because of age, but it's not that. Words feel heavy, too heavy to waste on small talk. I speak to the animals and to the stove and sometimes to the stars. I ask them questions no one answers, but I keep asking anyway, because one night maybe someone might answer back. One day the postman came. He rarely came this far out, unless it was spring taxes or a letter about something no one wanted. This time, though, he handed me an envelope. I stared at it for a while before touching it, afraid it would dissolve like fog if I blinked too hard. My hands shook as I took it. The name on the front was mine, but the writing wasn't his. It was a city address in the corner. Some kind of charity, I think. Inside was a thin piece of paper, just a few lines, typed, not handwritten. "Your son was admitted to our shelter 2 weeks ago. He left unexpectedly. If found, please contact us." That was it. No return address, no signature, not even a name for who wrote it. Just a stamp, faded like they didn't want to be found either. I sat down on the floor and read it again. Then again. Then a 4th time, like maybe the meaning would change if I kept reading. It didn't. I felt cold, but not from the weather. It was a different kind of cold, The kind that comes from deep inside, like your bones are remembering something your mind hasn't caught up to yet. For the next 3 days, I didn't eat much. I prepared a bag, patched my coat, and sold the last bag of rye to buy a train ticket. I left a note in case he came back while I was gone. "I'm coming for you. Stay safe. Wait for me." I folded it and stuck it in the doorframe with a nail. It felt foolish, but everything felt foolish lately. Hope most of all. The train was loud, full of smells I couldn't name and faces that didn't look at me. I sat with my bag on my lap like a shield. No one talked. A boy across the aisle had the same hair as my son, and for one long moment I let myself believe it was him. But he didn't look up, just stared out the window, lost in some world I couldn't enter. The city smelled like metal and fire and something rotting beneath the stone. People moved like they were being chased, but no one looked afraid, just tired. Everyone was always going somewhere, but no one seemed happy to get there. I walked for hours before I found the address on the letter. It was just a building, brick, gray, windowless, like a place meant for forgetting. Inside, a woman sat behind glass. Her voice was dry, professional, like she had said the same things too many times. Yes, we had a boy by that name. Didn't stay long. Wouldn't give details. Ran off before anyone could help. I asked if she knew where he went. She didn't even blink. "They always go somewhere," she said. "Usually nowhere." I stood outside the shelter until night fell. I thought maybe he'd return, that he'd forgotten something, a coat, a scarf, his name, and come looking for it. But the night swallowed the door, and no one came. I slept in an alley, holding my bag like a child. In the dark, I whispered his name over and over again, not to summon him, just to keep the sound alive. The next morning, I searched the markets. I asked vendors if they'd seen him. I held up a picture I drew from memory, the curve of his nose, the scar on his eyebrow from when he fell off the roof. Most people shook their heads. Some didn't even look. One man said, "There are too many boys here. They blur together." I hated him for saying it, but I knew he wasn't wrong. Days passed like water through broken hands. I stopped counting them. I slept where I could, ate what I could find, and walked every street I hadn't walked before. I learned the rhythm of the city, where the children begged, where the old men died quietly, where no one asked questions after dark. And still, nothing. No word, no trace. It was like chasing smoke. Eventually, I ran out of money. I sold my coat, then my boots, then my bag. I kept the letter, folded and worn, but it was all I had left that still pointed to him. My feet hurt, my back ached, but I kept walking. Because what else was there to do? One night I found a church that didn't lock its doors. I went inside, not to pray, but to rest. There were candles flickering on the altar. I lit one. Not for God, but for him. If he was still out there, I wanted some light to guide him back. Just one flame in a city that never stopped moving. I stayed in the city longer than I'd planned, long enough for the seasons to change again, but eventually I had to return home. Not because I gave up, I don't think I'll ever give up, but because I was becoming invisible. Like the city was swallowing me too. I needed to leave before I forgot my own name. When I got back, the note was still in the doorframe, unread, untouched. That hurt more than anything. Not even the wind had bothered with it. I sat on the step and stared at it for a long time. Then I took it down, folded it slowly, and tucked it into my shirt. I didn't burn it. I didn't cry. I just held it, like maybe it could still mean something. The house felt different after I came back. It hadn't changed. Same roof that leaked when the wind got cruel. Same table with the burn mark from an old candle. But the silence felt heavier. It didn't wait for me like before. It pressed down on me. Every step creaked like a question I couldn't answer. Every empty chair was a memory I didn't ask for. I sat at the table and looked at the spot where he used to sit. He always leaned forward too far, like he couldn't wait to get the words out. I used to tell him to sit straight, to act like a man. Now I would have paid anything to see him slump again, to hear him say something silly or wrong or full of hope. Anything but this, nothing. The village asked questions at first. Where had I gone? Why did I come back looking smaller? I told them pieces of the truth, that I went to find him, that I didn't. They nodded politely and moved on. They had their own losses to carry, and I had become one of them, just another man with an empty chair at his table. Some nights I lit a candle and placed it by the window, not for light, for signal. Maybe he was still wandering, maybe he'd see the glow and remember the way home. I told myself the wind might carry the flame far enough, but it always went out before morning. Still, I did it again the next night. It felt like all I had left. One morning I found a shirt of his in the barn, folded behind an old crate like it had waited there on purpose. I held it up to my face and it smelled like dust. No trace of him anymore. Just time. I sat there for hours, just holding it, thinking of how quickly things become relics. It wasn't a shirt anymore. It was what was left of his outline. I started writing him letters I couldn't send. I filled pages with things I never said when he was here. I told him I was proud, that I was scared, that I should have let him speak more, dream more, be more. I didn't sign them. He knew who they were from. I stacked them in a box beneath my bed, like they were seeds waiting for the right season to grow. Some days I walked the edge of the fields and imagined he was there beside me, just a little ahead, like when he was a child trying to race the wind. I spoke aloud sometimes, asking him where he went, if he was warm, if he hated me for sending him. The birds never answered, neither did the trees. But I talked anyway. Silence is cruel when it's the only voice left. A man came by once, said he'd seen a boy who looked like mine at the edge of a factory town 2 days away. He described him well, too well, right down to the chipped tooth and the scar above his lip. I ran that same day, didn't even pack food, just went. Feet bleeding and boots too thin for the road, hope burning through my ribs like fire. The town was smoke and metal and tired faces. I searched every corner, asked every boy, knocked on doors and showed them the drawing. Most stared, some shrugged. One boy said he'd seen someone like that. He was looking for work, the boy said. Didn't look like he belonged. I asked where he went. Don't know, no one stays here long. I spent 3 days in that town, sleeping under bridges, near chimneys, anywhere I could stay dry. I waited near the train station. I watched every face that passed, every boy with dark hair and tired eyes. I started to see him in all of them, then in none of them. Grief makes a mirror of the world, and everywhere you look, you only find yourself. I finally collapsed near the market, too tired to move. A woman offered me bread. I told her I didn't want it unless she'd seen him. She said, I see lost boys every day. They never stay. I ate the bread anyway. It tasted like dust, like shame, like the end of a story I wasn't ready to stop reading. I walked back slower this time, not because I was weaker, though I was, but because I didn't want the road to end. It was easier to keep walking than to admit there was nothing left to find. Each step was a question, each night was a prayer. Not to any God, I stopped believing in those, but to the idea that maybe, somehow, he'd find his way home before I forgot his voice. When I returned, the candle was still on the windowsill. I lit it without thinking. The flame flickered and danced, the way he used to when he was young and full of questions. I sat by the window and watched it. I think I was waiting for something. Not him. Not really. Just something. Winter arrived early that year. It came not as a storm, but as a slow tightening. The nights grew longer, and the wind started whispering things I didn't want to hear. I patched the roof with rags and straw, knowing it wouldn't hold. The cold got in anyway. It always does. I began talking to the photo of him I kept hidden in a drawer. I didn't want the neighbors to see me do it. They already thought I'd gone strange. But every night, I pulled it out, placed it on the table, and said everything I couldn't say when he was here. I told him I missed his voice more than the sound of rain on the roof. There was a boy once, maybe 13, who came to the village selling matches. He wore a coat too big for his bones, and his hands trembled when he spoke. For a moment, I thought maybe, but he looked up and the eyes were wrong. Still, I bought every match he had and gave him a blanket. It felt like something my son would have done. I started forgetting details. Was his left eye the one that squinted in the sun? Did his laugh start high and drop, or the other way around? Memory is a cruel thief. It doesn't take everything at once. It chips away slowly, kindly at first, then like a butcher. One day I couldn't remember the last thing I ever said to him. I wrote him one last letter. This time I didn't hold back. I told him I blamed myself for being poor, for dreaming too little, for sending him away into a world I didn't understand. I folded the letter, tied it with twine, and set it beside the candle. I didn't light it that night. I just watched it sit in the dark. Months passed. The snow came and went. I heard stories in town, boys found in rivers, boys locked in workhouses, boys who changed their names. Each one felt like a stab. I stopped asking, not because I gave up, but because I couldn't bear another almost. Hope starts to rot when it's left out too long. Then came the morning I found the dog barking at the gate. There was a man standing there, thin, dirty, eyes sunk deep into his skull. I didn't recognize him, not at first. But then he spoke. Just one word. Dad. My knees gave out. I reached for the wall to hold myself up, but I was already falling. His voice was cracked. He had scars on his face that hadn't been there before. He walked like every step hurt. I let him in without a word. We sat by the fire, silent, listening to the wind scratch the windows like an old enemy. He didn't tell me where he'd been. I didn't ask. Some stories aren't meant to be spoken. I made soup. He didn't eat much. He kept glancing around the house like it was both familiar and foreign. You kept it the same, he whispered. I nodded. It didn't feel right to change it. He looked at the candle by the window. I saw that once. Thought I imagined it. My throat tightened. I wanted to tell him I never stopped lighting it, but I couldn't speak. That night he slept in his old bed. I sat beside the door, afraid he'd vanish if I closed my eyes. In the morning, he was still there. Thinner, older, but breathing. I made bread, he carved a spoon. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of all the words we didn't have to say. A few days later, he left again. Not to run, not to disappear, just to get medicine from the town. I stood at the gate as he walked down the path. He looked back and smiled. I'll be back before the bread rises, he said. My heart clenched. I waited all day watching the hills. The bread didn't rise, but this time I believed him.